raw milk safe to drink? I know this can be a really controversial topic. I kind of wanted to give you guys my take on raw milk, why we drink it, why you might not want to consume it, and just some considerations that are often not really talked about. Just as a reminder, this is not a recommendation, this is not medical advice, this is not any of these things. It is just my take on things, it is just my personal perspective, my experience, and how I like to address this issue. And hopefully you can learn something from this video and then form your own opinion and decide what is best for your and your family's health and situation, because it's different for everybody. However, I do not believe that it is as black and white as it often is made out to be. And this is not really, I don't want to dive into the politics of it because it can be super politicized and it can also be a super divisive issue, and I really don't think that it's either or. It can be this and that, and I don't think that there is any conspiracies on one side or the other, just, you know, some facts. I actually, when I grew up in Germany and we were visiting my grandparents in their small village, they would often send me with a 2-liter, which is basically a 2-quart pail, down the little street to the local dairy and pick up some milk. And I remember very distinctly that when I picked it up, that it had just been milked, I guess is the word, milked, yeah, is that milked from the cow, and it was in huge vats, and they would scoop it out, ladle it out, and put it in my pail, and it was still warm. I remember carrying it back to my grandparents' house, and it was still body temperature from the cow. And then sometimes we would drink actually a glass of it, and then my grandmother would do various things like clabbered milk, and she would make some, in German it's called Dickmilch, which is kind of common here in this country, but I think it is clabbered milk. And then she would maybe even actually boil some of the milk to make it last longer, but I do remember drinking it and growing up with it. When we think about it, humans have been drinking milk for at least 10,000 years. And it is a curious fact, actually, when you think about it, that humans are consuming a product that is intended to make a calf grow into a, I don't know what a cow weighs, 1,200 pound cow. Now, because we have been doing this as humankind for over 10,000 years, it is my personal belief that we have evolved to be okay with it, and not just be okay with it, but actually thrive on it. And that's why I personally believe that it is not bad for me. I'm not lactose intolerant, and I grew up in Germany. All my ancestry is Northern European descent, and so that's why I believe that I'm actually okay on grain and dairy. Then what happened was, during the age of industrialization, when people moved from small villages into bigger cities to work in factories, they needed their milk in the cities. And the farms, the cows, were outside of the cities. And so that was the start of bigger dairies, but also milk had to be transported from the farms outside of the cities into the cities. And that is when, in the early 1900s, people decided, oh, it's actually safer if we boil the milk, pasteurize it, and then send it, because then there's no pathogens in it, it's not going to spoil as fast, it's going to last longer, and it's going to be safer to drink. And that is when it all started. We have been drinking and getting raw milk for 6 years, and we know exactly where it comes from. And here is the reasoning why we choose to drink raw milk. And I do want to say that we're not chugging it by the glass folds. My husband will sometimes have a glass when I make really nice sourdough chocolate chip cookies, because that is such a classic combination. But I mostly have it in my milk, and then I actually use it for some other dairy products that I'm going to talk to you about in a second. So why do we drink it? What are the reasons why we like it? First of all, I think it is just the most unadulterated, unprocessed way to consume milk, because it comes out of the udder, and that is just how it is. Nothing has been done to it other than just refrigerated. I also believe that it contains probiotics. It contains enzymes that may make digesting milk a little bit easier than if it's being pasteurized. And there are some studies that show that children who grew up drinking raw milk actually have 30% less incidences of upper respiratory infections and asthma and so forth. What we also like is that often it comes from small farms that practice regenerative farming practice. The cows where we get our milk from, they live outside 365 days a year. Now in California, that's actually possible because it doesn't get frozen or we don't get snow on the ground. And so the cows can actually stay outside all year long. However, even in places where that can not really happen, the cows can still get hay and not corn and soy, which they're not supposed to eat. So usually these farms, the cows are being grass-fed. We do believe in supporting these practices because there's a lot of different viewpoints out there about, what's the future of food production, but I do believe that regenerative farming is better for the soil, better for the climate, better for the animals, and better for us as humans. And I do like that I know the people who run this farm. I know them personally, and they have a small herd of cows. All the cows have names, which I think is really cute. I don't claim to know all the cows by their individual names because they all look the same to me because they're all Jersey cows. But I like that they're not being used as a machine or a production facility, but they're actually sentient beings with names and personalities. I also think that raw milk actually tastes better. It has a sweeter taste. If you drink raw milk and a regular pasteurized milk from the store, I think that the pasteurized milk has a slightly bitter taste to it, whereas the raw milk has a bit of a sweeter taste to it. And then what I like is that I can make certain cheeses with it and certain dairy products, fermented dairy products, that you cannot make with pasteurized yeast because it is lacking certain bacteria and other microbes that are naturally occurring in raw milk that you kill when you boil. So what do I do with it? We sometimes get a bigger supply, and that's just in the nature of things, that sometimes there's more milk and sometimes there's less milk. And we're getting into the calving season, so our cows are getting a bit of a break so that they can use all their energy for their calves and then feeding their calves in the spring, and then slowly the milk production is going to be started again, and then we're going to start getting milk again. And I also love that it is a natural product, so when the pastures are really rich, we get a thick layer of cream on top, and then sometimes when it gets a little bit drier towards the end of the season, the layer of fat may be a little bit smaller, but I love that it's a natural product and not the same all year round. What are the reasons against it? I mean, there is no shortage of articles that scare you into it can make you sick, it can, you can die from it, and it can contain certain pathogens and bacteria, and those are all going to only be killed if you actually boil the milk, you pasteurize it. And I was looking up, in preparation for this video, I was looking up some statistics and some studies, and in 2008, there were 8 documented outbreaks of raw milk that contained disease-causing pathogens. Well, how do I see this? So first of all, I believe that we do have some personal accountability, and we make choices about our life and health every single day. I can do really risky things. I can eat and drink whatever I want except for raw milk. Now, in some states it is legal, and in many other states it's completely illegal. And we live in a state where luckily it is legal to buy it from farms and in stores. However, I feel like we have some personal responsibility, and I don't really appreciate that all gets taken away from us when this is just concerning myself and not the greater good of everybody else. I also believe that there is such a fear around everything that doesn't come from a package, that doesn't come from a store, that doesn't come from a huge manufacturing. And I actually believe that in the case of raw milk, it's the other way around. I have a relationship with the farmers who produce the milk, and they know us. So for them, it's also a matter of ethics and honor and their livelihood, because if something were to happen and they were to have to shut down their operation, they would be out of business. So I know they have a very vested interest in keeping their business alive. Now, if you have huge dairy operations, those cows are living on top of each other. Oftentimes they are standing knee deep in mud, and they're living in very unhygienic conditions, which the cows that we get our milk from don't, because they're out in the pasture, they have enough space, and they can stay away from each other. So the cows that often are in the dairies, they get treated with antibiotics and all sorts of other medications to keep them healthy. And I don't believe that that milk is very healthy, and I would not want to drink that milk unpasteurized if I got it from one of those big dairy operations. And then lastly, when everybody's talking about raw milk and how dangerous it is and everything, but then at the same time, I get news that there's E. coli on lettuce and there's E. coli on carrots, and nobody seems to be suggesting that we should only eat cooked lettuce. So, I mean, every time that we get something from huge industrial production sites, there always is a risk of some contamination with something. And if I grow the lettuce in my own garden, I probably don't have that problem. And if I get my raw milk from a small farm, I probably don't have that problem at all. And then, of course, there are certain risks in life that we can just not completely rule out. And this is where I think it is a matter of personal choice and figuring out what's healthiest for you and your family. But then I also believe that you can buy raw milk. And if you're not sure, you can pasteurize it in your home, which is often a very different process than the pasteurization that happens in the big dairies. So, is there any middle road? Like I said, you can actually boil the milk yourself. I also believe that there's other options. Now, I don't know what you have in your state, but here in California, as in our area, we are lucky to get Strauss milk. Those cows also live outside 365 in an area called Point Reyes. You can look that up on the map. And what they do is they call it minimally processed, which means that it is not pasteurized at a very high temperature and it is not homogenized. Now, this milk I have already opened, but oftentimes there's a thick layer of cream here that I need to either poke down or stir down or something to actually be able to pour it. And obviously they do have a whole milk and they do have a 2% and a 1%, and I don't know if they have a non-fat milk. However, the unhomogenized milk is less processed than one that is homogenized. And what I understand is that the milk fat gets taken out entirely, stripped away from the milk. And then if you have whole milk, I think they add 2.5 or 2.8% back to it. For the 2% milk, they add exactly 2% to it. And as I said earlier, if you get the raw milk from the cows directly from the farm and nothing happened to it, it could be 4%. It could even be more than 4%. It could be 3.8% fat. You just never know exactly. And that is what you can do. You can also, there's another company called Kelowna Supernatural. I also know that they make a very high quality pasteurized milk, and you can go on their website and if you can't find it locally in your store, you can talk to your grocery buyers and ask them to carry it for you because it is one of the better milks to buy. I do also want to talk about a little bit of marketing practices because oftentimes we find grass-fed milk, or we find these milks that have ingredients added to them like vitamin D or omega-3 fatty acids. Now, I don't believe that they belong in there. I know that milk from grass-fed cows is naturally high in a lot of vitamins and nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, for example, also in grass-fed beef, but also in beta carotene, which makes it so yellow. And when I make my own butter, my butter is yellow. I don't have to add carrot color to it to make it yellow. It's not pale, it's really yellow. When you look, you will see that often those milks are also ultra high pasteurized, which means that they will last extremely long and they sound good on the label, but they are an extremely processed product. And we are trying to eat real food, stay away from highly processed foods. And for me, something that is ultra pasteurized and homogenized is an ultra processed food in my book. So here are the things that I promise you I will talk to you about. I do make my own Quark. Is a German fresh cheese. It's a little bit like a farmer's cheese. It's a little bit like ricotta or cottage cheese, but it has a much milder, fresher taste. And I make that from buttermilk. Now I do actually heat that up to a little bit, but not really to pasteurize it. And then I add buttermilk to it, and then I strain it, and then I have this. I can make a German cheesecake with it. I can eat it with herbs and make it like an herbed product, and I just absolutely love it. It's a fantastic product. I also do have here my raw milk kefir. I know people say kefir, I don't know. I always say kefir because it just sounds better. And these kefir grains that I have in here are actually raw milk kefir grains. So I always need to make sure that I can find raw milk for my kefir grains. If I ever wanted to transition, I would slowly have to transition my kefir grains and get them used to pasteurized milk, and that would happen like just add a little bit and then the rest raw milk and then slowly increase. But I also believe that this is such a fantastic, healthy product full of probiotics. It's actually a lot better than yogurt. It has more strains, more probiotics than yogurt. I think yogurt only has 4 and kefir can have like 20 or 30 or something like that. Many parts of the world, people love to eat raw milk cheese, and this is my favorite cheese. It's called Gruyere. In German, it's called Gruyère, and this is a raw milk cheese. In France, raw milk cheeses are actually very sought after, and nobody actually thinks anything about it. And if you're still a little bit on the fence, I have a book that I absolutely love. It's called The Art of Natural Cheese Making. And this is somebody that really speaks my language because he talks about microbial contents and a whole makeup rather than trying to divide things up into each of their own components. And he has a lot of recipes for making cheese at home, and all you really need for that is raw milk, and he always uses raw kefir for making his cheeses. It's a fantastic book, and I still have a bunch of cheeses in here that I would love to make. I'd love to try, but for that I also need a little bit more milk because you can't just make it from like 2 quarts of milk. And then I want to add a story that is not necessarily about raw milk, but it kind of shows you a little bit the fear-mongering that's been going on and the kind of thinking that we have been getting used to. And that is, there's a documentary by the journalist Michael Pollan, and it's called Cooked. I think he also wrote a book about it first, and then there's a documentary. I highly recommend it. It's very fascinating. And in that, he tells a story of a nun on the East Coast that went to France to learn how to make a certain cheese. Now, if I'm getting certain details of the story incorrectly, please correct me, but I just want to give you the gist of the story. And she's been making this cheese, and then apparently the health department came and said, well, that's not sanitary because you're making that cheese in wooden vats, and that's just not sanitary. It has to be in stainless steel vats. This nun also happens to be a biochemist. I think she has a PhD in biochemistry, and she said, okay, let's make a little, let's have a little experiment here. I'm going to make one batch of the cheese in the wooden vats and another batch of the cheese in the stainless steel vats. And what turns out is that there actually were E. coli bacteria in the cheese from the stainless steel vats versus the one from the wooden vats, because what happened was that in all the little nooks and crevices of the wood, there were certain bacteria, beneficial bacteria, that outcrowded the E. coli bacteria. So that cheese is actually, from the wooden vats, is actually much healthier and has no E. coli in it versus the one in the stainless steel vat. So sometimes over sanitizing and over cleaning can be detrimental. And so the health department apparently said, all right, then you continue making your cheese the way you have been making. I hope that you found this interesting. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.